Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast, your home for Pittsburgh Penguins news and analysis. You can find us on YouTube at Tip of the Ice-Burgh. Make sure you like, make sure you subscribe, tell all of your friends, or you can find us anywhere you get your podcast from. It is our weekly live episode. We're going to recap a really successful road trip for the Pittsburgh Penguins. I'll share my 3 stars of the week. We'll look ahead to what the Penguins have on deck for the next week. And then, of course, as we always do, we will answer all of your questions if you're tuned in with us live at Tip of the Ice-Burgh on YouTube. But, I mean, the emphasis of this show is kind of look back on a very successful road trip for the Penguins, an important road trip for the Penguins as they try to get off to a better start than they have the past couple of seasons. We all know what happened last Wednesday at the home opener. The Penguins, they get embarrassed. They lose 6-0 to a division rival in the New York Rangers. The whole team looked extremely bad. I mean, maybe outside of the first 10 minutes where they had that home opener bump, right? Well, I'll talk about that on multiple occasions here because there was a lot of home openers as it pertains to the Pittsburgh Penguins and their schedule over the past week. But they had that home opener bump where they looked like they were outplaying the New York Rangers, and you thought, okay, this is a nice vibe check, right? I mean, Hunter Hodes says it. Jesse Marshall says it on Twitter all the time. Hey, what's the vibe check after the first commercial break, the second commercial break? It was really good. And then, of course, it all kind of fell apart. Tristan Jarry took a lot of the heat. He took the brunt of the distaste from the Penguins fan base, if you will, after that game. But at the same time, I mean, he wasn't getting a lot of help in front of him. 12-0 was the final total when it comes to the odd man rushes in that game. It was just, all in all, a poor performance from all 20 players that were out there, except for, I mean, I guess you could say 19. Joel Blomqvist on the bench didn't really have anything negative to contribute to that game. And so 19 players that just did not have a good night. That's one that you just want to crumple up and toss right back in the garbage. And that's what they did. And they got out on this road trip. And that's sometimes the best thing for a team. Right after you get embarrassed, right after you go and have a disappointing performance on your home ice to start the season, the best thing sometimes is just get out of town, get on the road, go out and try to figure things out with your teammates when there is less distractions. And that's what they went out there and did. They had a very successful road trip going 2-1. Mike Sullivan said, listen, if we win every road trip we go on, we're going to be sitting in a pretty solid position. And that's exactly what they were able to do, which I called this the original 6 tour for the Pittsburgh Penguins, going against the Red Wings, the Maple Leafs, the Canadiens, all on the road to start their road portion of this season. And they started it off good. I mean, I talk about, it's good to bounce back, and sometimes it's better to do it on the road. Sometimes it's best to do it the following day. And that's exactly what they were able to do last Thursday night in Detroit. Bounced back in a big way. They fought off the opening night bump. So the shoe was on the other foot in this one. The Detroit Red Wings had that opening night spark where they had their legs. They were coming after the Penguins. But for the Penguins, and this might have been one of the biggest differences between night 1 and night 2 of the season this year, they had the goaltender that was able to keep them in the game. And that was Joel Blomqvist, making his NHL debut, made 29 saves on 32 shots. And when you look at the 3 goals that he gave up, I mean, the first one, a 2-on-1 or a 3-on-1 with a back checker coming back. They allow that pass across, and Alex DeBrincat just wires it to exactly where he wanted it to go. And sometimes you're in the NHL, players are just going to hit their spots. He was able to do it, and that was a tough save for Blomqvist to make. He was unable to make it, but what I think you saw in this kid in that game was that the stage was not too big. He made several 10-bell saves, and like I mentioned, he was one of the biggest reasons why the Penguins didn't succumb to that opening night bump that the Detroit Red Wings were certainly experiencing in the first 10 minutes, 15 minutes of that game. This is a guy who, we'll talk about a lot this season because there's a likely chance that he ends up back in the AHL in the coming weeks. But this is somebody who everybody was excited about at the tail end of last season. He had an all-star season in his rookie year at the AHL. He was on the all-AHL team at the end of last season. And Kyle Dubas said as part of his season-ending press conference that they're really going to keep an eye on what he was able to do in the Calder Cup playoffs. Now, unfortunately, that was cut short. They lost in 2 games to the Lehigh Valley Phantoms. So everything was kind of thrown out the window and speculation was thrown up into the air. If you look at what the Penguins did in the offseason, they didn't bring somebody else in to sit in front of Blomqvist when it comes to the organizational depth chart. They're counting on him to be that number 3. And then lo and behold, he gets that opportunity with Alex Nedeljkovic going down week to week with that lower body injury. He takes it in Detroit. He runs with it. He has a very impressive outing, and he gets his first career NHL victory. And he was so impressive that he ended up getting the start on Saturday. And we talked about that enough. We're not going to dive deeply into that. We did a real deep dive into the Penguins goaltending situation yesterday on the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast. So if you want a more extended discussion about what the Penguins goaltending situation is looking like after 4 games, why there's more questions than answers, we talked about that on yesterday's episode. You can go and check that one out anytime at Tip of the Ice-Burgh on YouTube. But Blomqvist goes again. Identical stat line, kind of an identical performance. Makes a handful of 10-bell saves, gives up a couple of goals that most goaltenders in the National Hockey League are going to struggle to make saves on, let alone somebody making their second career start. And the Penguins fall 4-2 to the Toronto Maple Leafs in a game where, I mean, they were in it the whole way, down 3-1. Rickard Rakell scores a goal, which I want to talk about a little bit more in a second. You're down by 1, you give up that empty net goal, and you couldn't get over the hump, and the offense just couldn't create enough against the Toronto Maple Leafs. So they fall 4-2. The 2 important things happened in that game. For one, Bryan Rust gets back onto the ice. Bryan Rust is going to be of vast importance for the Pittsburgh Penguins. We talked about it yesterday. Their bottom 6, at least through the 4 games that we've seen so far, has stepped up in a big way for them. But is that going to be the case all season long? No, there's going to be ups and downs with everybody in the lineup. One of the guys that they're counting on to be one of their most consistent contributors is going to be Bryan Rust. So getting him back onto the ice just 3 games into the season is a big deal for the Pittsburgh Penguins. Now, did he look like he was 100%? Did he look like he still had to shake the rust off, if you will? Yes, he did. But getting him back in the 3rd game of the season is a big deal for the Penguins. And the other thing, kind of mentioned it earlier, Rickard Rakell getting on a board with an absolute rocket of a goal to take it from 3-1 to 3-2 late in that 3rd period. Rakell is going to be extremely important for the Penguins this year because Bryan Rust is a guy who, listen, last year he was on pace. If he would have played the full 82, and again, that's a big if, he would have been close to a 40-goal scorer. This is a guy that has scored at a 30-goal pace for the past half decade for the Penguins. Rakell is a guy who 2 years ago, first full season in Pittsburgh, scored 28, including 11 on the power play. He tied for the team lead in power play goals 2 years ago. Last year, gets injured, but even before the injury, 17 games into the season, he didn't have a goal. Then he goes on the shelf for multiple weeks. For him to get on the board and get on the board in a big way, big wrist shot goal, blows it past the goaltender, a Rickard Rakell, Tricky Ricky type goal, that is huge for the Penguins. They're going to need him to step up in a big way this season, and that was a solid sign in that game against the Maple Leafs. And then they rounded out that road trip with a 6-3 win over the Montreal Canadiens. Again, not a game in which they controlled the entire 60 minutes. I don't think this is a Penguins team that is going to control the 60 minutes of a game on most nights, but they were able to withstand all of the pushes from the Canadiens, and then they were able to take over and take advantage of their opportunities, which I think is something that you're going to need to see when they're at their best. That's what they're going to be doing, is taking advantage of their opportunities, despite the fact that they're not going to get them throughout the entire game. They're not going to control the full 60 minutes. That's just not something you can expect from the Pittsburgh Penguins this season. But if they're able to take advantage, if they're able to finish on those opportunities, that's when you're going to see 6-3 wins, and you're going to see the Penguins have these successful road trips, these winning records during these stretches. And that's what you want. Now, Monday, big story. Bottom 6 goes off. Lars Eller has one of the best games that he has had since joining the Pittsburgh Penguins, and he's been pretty good throughout most of his tenure in the black and gold. 2 goals for Lars Eller. And then, of course, Kevin Hayes snags that game-winning goal out in front. That's something that I know a lot of listeners that listen to this show and a lot of Penguins fans are going to be happy to see. They want to see more goals in the net front. They want to see more players in the net front. Kevin Hayes goes, does it, gets rewarded, gets his second goal of the road trip and his first game-winning goal of the season. The other storyline for that one, Tristan Jarry, given the opportunity to bounce back. And I'd say he did. I mean, 24 saves on 27 shots. 2 of the 3 goals, the first and the third one, weren't great. But I will say Tristan Jarry closed things out well. He shut it down in the 3rd period, 9 saves on 9 shots. And at the end of the day, he got the win. And that's what you're hoping for from Tristan Jarry. Now, of course, it is just a start. It is the beginning of him climbing back and climbing out of the hole that he put himself in with that 6-0 loss last Wednesday night. But it's better to climb back when you're winning than it is when you're losing. A solid performance from Tristan Jarry. And the Penguins, through 1 week of the season, are 2-2-0, a 500 record with 2 wins on the road, 1 loss at home, and they return home tonight to take on the Buffalo Sabres, the beginning of another busy week. We talked about it on the outset of this one. The Penguins have a very, very busy October. I mean, 4 games in 6 days to start their NHL season, and it doesn't get any slower now. They come back for 2 games starting tonight against the Buffalo Sabres, 7:07 puck drop on TNT and Max, and then Friday, they take on the Carolina Hurricanes. That's going to be a difficult matchup, and then all of a sudden, you're back out on the road, and not just on the road, you're back out on the road on the Western Canada road trip. So the Penguins are getting a lot of road travel done in the month of October. Sunday, they'll take on the Winnipeg Jets. Fortunately for us on the East Coast, that is an afternoon game. They take on the Jets at 3 o'clock, so we don't have to deal with 4 late night starts. And then Tuesday, they'll take on the Calgary Flames, which leads us right up to next Tuesday's live stream, where we'll do this all again. So a busy week for the Penguins in the opener. Again, some good, some not so good for the Pittsburgh Penguins, but at the end of the day, they go out on the road, they get a winning record, and they come home looking a lot better than they did when they departed about a week ago. Let's move over to the 3 stars of the week before getting to all of your listener questions. Shout out to everybody that is jumping into the chat right now. We'll make sure we try to get to all of your questions like I mentioned. So if you have them, toss them in there. We'll get to them right after this 3-star segment. But number 3, I'm going to give it to a guy that was in my power rankings on Monday. I'm going to give it to a guy that maybe in 2 weeks isn't at the NHL level, but in the first week, he certainly earned some honors, and he's going to get the 3rd star of the week from me, Yoel Blomqvist. 2 games played, a 1-1 record, a 3.03 goals against average, and a 9.06 save percentage. I said a lot about Blomqvist whenever I was going through the week that was for Penguins hockey, but in his first taste of NHL action, the kid looks very good. And again, if this is the base, he has a long way to go. And that just means great things for the Pittsburgh Penguins. They have him. They have Sergei Murashov, who won his first AHL game over the weekend. The future is looking bright when it comes to the youngsters at the goaltending position. When it comes to the veterans, it's a different story. Let's not get into that again. Like I said, we talked about it yesterday. But he is definitely closer to NHL ready than everybody thought. I mean, going into this season, I said he looked great last year, but is he really ready to take that step from the AHL to the NHL? And I don't think that this is a guy that you have to 100% keep in the NHL all season long, but I think this is a guy that the timetable is this year. If you can find a spot for him, if you can create an opportunity for him, which right now due to injury, there is an opportunity for him. He is 100% ready to be in that role, to be at the NHL level. Is he ready to be a bona fide number 1, gets, 5 out of 8 starts? We don't know. Maybe not yet. Maybe that's a later this year type of scenario for Joel Blomqvist, but he is ready as of right now to play NHL hockey and to get into these games and to take on that level of talent. I think that that is what he showed in week 1. I think that that's what he showed after being blown up in the preseason opener. Let's not forget, he gave up 5 goals in 6 minutes to the Buffalo Sabres in his preseason debut. And then after that, he was absolutely spectacular. Now, was he good enough to where he would have stayed at the NHL level had it not been for injury? No, because 1, I don't think a 3 goaltender system works for anybody. And 2, I think that when you look at the 2 goalies they have, it's hard to think that the Penguins are going to go to anybody else besides a $5 million guy in Jarry and a $2.5 million guy in Nedeljkovic. But there's going to be time this year where you're going to want to turn to Joel Blomqvist. There's going to be time this year where the Penguins are going to want to get him opportunities. And if it's not for injuries, it might have to be through trade. And that's all I'll say on that. But 3rd star of the week goes to Yoel Blomqvist. Phenomenal first week at the NHL level for the Finn. Let's go over to our 2nd star of the week. And I could have gone a lot of places because Jesse Puljujärvi has been really good when he was in. He had that healthy scratch on Saturday, which Still doesn't make much sense to me, but I do understand they're trying to kind of experiment. I mean, the competition from training camp has carried right over into the regular season, and that's good. That means that they're going to have quick triggers on a lot of these guys if they're not performing, because there is talent both scratched and at the AHL level that they want to get a chance to see at the NHL level. So I like that. So that's why I kind of understand the benching or the scratching of Jesse Puljujärvi, but he's been very good. Lars Eller, I mentioned, was extremely good in Montreal, and honestly has been extremely good in all the games. I think his offensive side of the puck has been much improved from what we saw last year. And last year, it was above what we could have expected from Lars Eller. So a solid start for him. Kevin Hayes has multiple goals. I mean, Letang has a power play goal. Karlsson has a power play goal. Crosby has multiple assists on the season. But second star of the week this week, I'm going to go with Tricky Ricky. Rickard Rakell, 4 games played, 2 goals, no assists. But at the end of the day, are we really worried about the assist number when it comes to Rickard Rakell? Or are we worried about him putting the puck in the back of the net? I think it's the latter. And he's been able to do that and do that well. Goals in back-to-back games, and both of them, like I mentioned earlier, not just, hey, the net's open, he jams at home. That's not his game. Both of them, absolute snipes on both goaltenders. Montembeault on Monday, and whoever was in net, I can't even remember because the Maple Leafs continue to put random people in net. Whoever he beat on Saturday as well. But goals in back-to-back games, both Rockets, and then underlying numbers are also absolutely on point for Rickard Rakell. I mean, he's leading the Pittsburgh Penguins with 63% of the shot attempts at 5-on-5 when he's on the ice. He's second on the Penguins in expected goals percentage when on the ice at 5-on-5. He has 69% in that category. And when he's on the ice, the Penguins are outscoring their opponents 6-1, which is the widest margin in the positive direction for the Penguins all season long. He has been phenomenal for the Penguins. They're going to need him to be that way. I talked about why earlier in the show, but he has been nothing short of phenomenal for them in the first week of the season. And then the number 1 star of the week, he's been on all of these graphics since the preseason began. He's going to be number 1 to lead things off here. He was number 1 in my power rankings on Monday. So if you saw that, it's a little spoiler alert for what's about to come in a second. But Evgeni Malkin is my number 1 star of the opening week of the 2024-25 season for the Pittsburgh Penguins. 4 games played, 1 goal, which means he's still 1 shy of 500, a marker that he has been talking about all the time. He just needs to get it. I'm hoping he gets it tonight so we can talk about it on tomorrow's show. But he has 1 goal, 6 assists. And this is coming for a guy who, remember, the Penguins were shut out in their opener. So that's in the last 3 games. He has had 6 assists and 1 goal for 7 points. He's currently riding a 3-game multi-assist streak, having 2 assists in Detroit, had 2 assists in Toronto, and had 2 assists in Montreal. He tacked on an empty net goal, and hence the reason he is currently tied for 2nd in the NHL in scoring through week 1. So obviously, Evgeni Malkin was going to be the guy that we're going to give that number 1 star to. So here we go. 3 stars. Joel Blomqvist. I hope the kid gets more opportunities this year. He's certainly earned more opportunity based on his performance this week. Rickard Rakell is number 2. Somebody that, listen, they need to work out. 4 years left on that contract. Boy, do they need it to work out. He certainly can't have a similar season as he did last year. Part of that, I will say, was probably the shoulder injury that he had to wear a brace for, that he does not wear a brace for now, hence the reason his shot might be a little bit better. I mean, I digress on that point, but Rickard Rakell, number 2 star of the week. And then Gino Machino, not only 4 games played, 1 goal, 6 assists, multiple milestones in the completed column. But, I mean, he laid somebody out on Monday. When he's throwing open ice hits, I think you know he's feeling it. He has his legs. He's looking good. That patented gallop through the neutral zone is back. You're hoping that it persists, but 82 games is a long season. What we're seeing now, though, is Evgeni Malkin. I mean, he's as good as he once was, and he's as good this first week as he's ever been. So a solid week for Evgeni Malkin. But we're going to take a quick break. When we return, we'll get to all your questions. So if you're tuned in live at Tip of the Ice-Burgh on YouTube, make sure you drop your question in. We'll get to it, like I mentioned, right after this break. Welcome back to the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast. Shout out to everybody that has dropped questions in already. And again, if you're tuned in live, drop in a question in the chat. We'll try to get to all of them before we call it quits today. Shout out to Mitch. Mitch is keeping me honest. I mean, sometimes pronunciation is a local thing. Mitch, from a Canadian, you're saying Montreal Canadiens wrong. Don't know if that's just how you're saying it, or if you don't know it's wrong, saying it like Montreal Canadiens. That is the correct way. He also said Toronto is not Toronto up there, it's Toronto, which, again, listen, discussion and speech is local. That's just how I say it, but glad that you kept me on my toes. Always appreciate people keeping me straight. But let's get into the questions here, and let's start with Gunnar Murphy, who says, would you rather have Beauvillier or McGroarty next to Sidney Crosby? By the end of the year, I'd rather have Rutger McGroarty. For right now, I think I'd rather have Anthony Beauvillier. There's been a lot of people, and Gunnar, you might be one of them, that have kind of compared Beauvillier to a Carl Hagelin, suited best in that bottom six role where he's a penalty killer. He's a kind of a scat type of bottom sixer that's going to be able to give you some speed, give you some turnovers, be good on the forecheck. But I think what you're seeing right now, and he has 2 goals. He had those 2 goals in Detroit, which was nice. If he's able to finish, keep him up there with Sid. Because right now, McGroarty, he hasn't been given those opportunities because the Penguins don't feel like he's ready. And honestly, looking through the first 3 games, he wasn't bad, but it wasn't something where I was saying, oh, you know what he needs? He needs to be next to Sid. I think right now, with the fact that this is Sid's first year without Jake Gensel in a long time, he needs some more established guys to start the season. I think McGroarty, by the end of the year, could establish himself enough to get that opportunity, or at the very least, get a cup of coffee up there with Sid's wing. But as of right now, I think I'd rather have Anthony Beauvillier. He has been pretty good to start the season. He's a shot merchant. I mean, the guy, last I checked, which was before the Montreal game, before the Montreal game, Beauvillier was leading the Penguins in shots on goal. He's a shot merchant. He's going to put everything on net. And right now, I mean, I'll take that on Sid's line. It's not the perfect situation. You'd obviously want somebody with a little bit more of a pedigree up there. But McGroarty, I think, has to grow into that. Let's go to That Rotten Egg, who says, once Ned gets back, do you think Yoel is getting sent back down to Wilkes-Barre? Yes. He is waivers exempt. The Penguins right now are at their full capacity, 23 of 23 players on their NHL roster, so somebody will have to go down. I don't think it's going to be a forward, and I don't think they're going to continue to keep the 3 goaltenders. We've seen it around the league a little bit. A couple of years ago, it was Buffalo, who's in town tonight for a game with, if I'm not going to be able to get all 3 of these guys correct, but I believe it was Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, it was Devin Levi, and then there was another goaltender, but they were running that 3-goalie system because they believed that all of them deserved opportunities at the NHL level. I just don't think that they're going to want to sit Yoel, because when Ned comes back, you're going to want to get him some action. You're going to want to get his feet underneath him, and you're not going to sit Jarry down for extended periods of time to get just Ned and Blomqvist between the pipes. So I do think that Yoel Blomqvist ends up getting sent down. I'm hoping it's not for the remainder of the season, but I think what we're going to see is going into next year, Blomqvist is going to be in serious consideration to be number 1 or number 2 for the Pittsburgh Penguins between the pipes. Let's go over to Nigel Drake, who says, is it just me, or does Cody Glass look like a potential steal? Well, for one, it's easy to be a steal whenever you didn't pay anything for him, right? I mean, the Penguins essentially took on Cody Glass and were paid to take on Cody Glass. But I get what you're saying. He has looked very good at that 4th line center role. I don't know where he slots in when Blake Lizotte comes back, which, according to Mike Sullivan, Blake Lizotte skated this morning, and he had skated a few times previous, but today was a big step in him getting back into action and getting back into the lineup. So when Lizotte comes back, you'd have to figure that 4C role is kind of earmarked for him. Where does Cody Glass fit once that's the case, right? Do you take out one of the veterans and Kevin Hayes, who already has 2 goals, or Noel Acciari, who's your best penalty killer, who's your best physical presence, who's your best shot blocker? I don't see that happening. So where does he fit? I'm not paid to figure that one out. And I also think the 3rd line has looked good. You're not going to take O'Connor out of the lineup, right? You're certainly not taking Lars Eller out of the lineup. And I said it a couple days ago, and I will stand true to this. You don't take Jesse Puljujärvi out of the lineup for the foreseeable future. You sat him on Saturday. Cool. He lost his opportunity to win the Iron Penguin Award, which, if you're new here, that's an award that we essentially give out to anybody who plays all 82 games. Puljujarvi, because he sat, is no longer eligible, but he has been very good in all 3 games. So where does Glass fit? I don't know, but he's played very well. I mean, he's playing with pace. He is playing well on the penalty kill as well, which is a new dimension to his game, or at least it's something where he's doing a lot more of in Pittsburgh than he did in his previous 2 stops. And overall, he just looks like a really good depth piece for the Penguins. So I agree with you. He's definitely a steal, especially when you consider the fact that the Penguins are paid to take him, which is a great coup there from Kyle Dubas. Let's go to Evan. Evan's my buddy. Evan always, keeps me straight on Twitter as well. We have a nice back and forth. So I appreciate you tuning in here at Tip of the Ice-Burgh on YouTube. He says, obviously, Crosby is still playing very well, but maybe not as well as he would like. Why do you think he hasn't gotten a goal yet? Well, I think for one, look at his line. The first 2 games, it was Drew O'Connor and Anthony Beauvillier. Who's going to be the setup man if Sidney Crosby's trying to be the goal scorer, right? He has to be the facilitator. That's what he's been for a lot of his career. But that's one of the biggest things, that you take Jake Gensel off that line, Crosby's going to be looking to set guys up versus, hey, other guys are going to be able to set him up. I mean, how many great looks is Beauvillier going to give Crosby on a one-timer, or Drew O'Connor going to give Crosby on a one-timer? And then you get Brian Rust back in there. But again, I made the dad joke before. I'm not going to make it again. He needs to get his legs underneath him a little bit more. So I think that has a part to play in it. But I also think that you're right. I mean, he's playing well, but there's just still something that's a touch off with Sidney Crosby to start the season. And part of that might just be, hey, it's a slow start. The guy's 37 years old. It's going to happen. He still has 3 assists in 4 games. I think there are still times where you see him playing at that high level. But I think part of it is he just needs time to mesh with his line mates now, especially a guy in Beauvillier who they've spent the better part of the past month playing on the same line. But when those live bullets start to fire in the regular season, sometimes it takes a little bit of extra time. So that, and with the new power play, it looks like a lot of shots are coming from Letang, Karlsson, and Malkin, and not as much from Sidney Crosby. So I think that plays a part in it as well. I wouldn't be surprised if, honestly, since we're asking this, I wouldn't be surprised if Crosby goes out there and gets his first tonight, but it's certainly going to come in short order for him because he's not playing poorly. He's just not at that level that everybody anticipates and everybody expects out of 87. Let's go over to Nigel again, who has an interesting comment here. I watch every video, but never get a chance to ask live. Well, appreciate you stopping by for this live and hope you can join more in the future. It says, all I want to know is how fast does your hair grow, man? Like, I'm jealous. Well, I mean, taking it behind the curtain here, I'm not going to stick too much on this because people want to talk about hockey, but probably going to get it cut here soon. But this is over a year. Like, I got it cut, I believe, a month and a half before my wedding, which was last August. So I probably got it cut last July, and that's why it's as long as it is. I got curly hair, so if it wasn't, it'd be down below my shoulders. But it doesn't grow fast. I've just let it grow out for a very long time. And I wear hats a lot because I like hats. I'm a hat guy. So a lot of the time, it hides the growth. But I appreciate Nigel taking notice of the hair. I take great pride in it sometimes. Sometimes I don't like my hair, hence the reason, hat guy. But let's go over to Alex, who says, one of the biggest differences, and this is more of a comment than a question, but certainly a valid comment that deserves to be highlighted here. One of the biggest differences between this year and last year is the bottom 6 actually being able to provide a spark for the rest of the lineup. That is exactly what Kyle Dubas said at his beginning of the year press conference. Got to get my press conferences all right, and then we're going to start getting GM shows on top of that, which is great. I love how much Dubas speaks to the public, and it's certainly a change from what we had in the last regime. But he said, last year, we relied on our bottom 6 a lot to defend. And we said, all right, the top 6 in the power play, that's where we're going to get our offense from, but we want to make sure we defend our own net well. That plan didn't work. So he scrapped it. And he restructured the bottom 6 for a second consecutive offseason and said, we're trying to get more goals from that unit, including some younger guys, because they don't want to set guys up like Puustinen, guys like McGroarty, guys like, when he gets an opportunity this year, because he will, Ville Koivunen or Vasily Ponomarov. They don't want to set those guys who have high offensive potential up to just say, hey, you're going to take defensive zone draws. You're going to shuffle the puck up the ice, and that's going to be your shift because then the big guns are coming over the board. No, they want to trust these young guys to put the puck in the back of the net, to contribute, and to score goals when the big guns are on the bench, because that, as you mentioned, Alex, is a huge boost for this entire team. We saw it on the road trip, the 2-goal performance from Lars Eller, 2 goals in the 3 games from Kevin Hayes. We talked about Cody Glass already. He's playing well in the offensive zone, doesn't have a goal, but he does have an assist. I mean, Jesse Puljujärvi looks extremely good in the offensive and defensive zones. Really, in all 3 zones, he's looked good so far this season. So it's nice that the bottom 6 has started the way they have. Let's see if they can keep it up. And let's see if somebody falls off, if the replacements can come in and keep that level up. Guys like Puustinen, guys like Sam Poulin, whenever he potentially gets an opportunity, can they keep that level up? I think that's the one question mark going through the rest of the season if you're the Penguins as it pertains to their bottom 6. Mitch wants to know, do you think we see a Crosby versus Krebs fight round 2? I mean, I don't know. That's been a underlying storyline over the past couple of years, is Crosby kind of keeping those kids straight, right? I mean, we all remember when Trevor Zegras took a liberty and took a shot on net after an offsides call. Crosby just shoulder checked him and basically said, listen, don't do it again. Like, back in Crosby's day, Darian Hatcher would have taken somebody's head off, but Crosby's just going to throw some warnings. And like we saw last year, went after Peyton Krebs after Krebs took some liberties on one of the Penguins players. So do I think we see it? Probably not. If I was going to put money on it, I'm always going to put money on the no, Crosby doesn't get into a fight, but I'm sure that's in the back of his mind, and I'm sure it's in the back of Krebs' mind, because that's not something you forget when 87 drops the mitts with you. Let's go to Iconicare. Sorry if I botched that name. I'm horrible with screen names, but he says, if Lizotte were to return, would he even push anyone out of the lineup? Right now, I think he gets to sit next to Puustinen. I would think that they're going to give him an opportunity over Cody Glass. I think that is what you see happen. It's going to be similar to what you saw with Jesse Puljujärvi. All right, well, Brian Rust is back. Somebody has to come out of the lineup. Let's see if McGroarty can do it with another opportunity. Puljujärvi's been playing well, but he's just going to sit for a night. I think you're going to see Lizotte get into there, and then you're going to kind of look at who the weakest link is, and then Cody Glass gets back in. It's not going to be a one-game thing, because they're certainly not going to just put Lizotte in for one game and then say, hey, well, you didn't look great, even though you've been concussed for the past half of a month, so we're going to take you right back out. No, I think that what you're going to see is a lot of matching up with who you're going up against, right? If you're going up against the Edmonton Oilers, maybe you take Kevin Hayes out and you put in Lizotte and Cody Glass, because they're a fast team, they're a speedy team. Same thing with the New Jersey Devils. But if you're going up against a bigger, more broader team like a Winnipeg Jets, yeah, you probably have Kevin Hayes in there. And like I mentioned, if Lizotte is to come back, you put Lizotte in there. I don't think that they're going to have him come back healthy and sit on the bench. That's a player that they liked a lot, right? They like what they have in Cody Glass. That was kind of an opportunity that cropped up and they took advantage of it. Blake Lizotte's somebody they sought out in free agency. So I think he does get an opportunity whenever he's healthy. And I think Cody Glass is probably the guy that comes out. But again, not because Cody Glass has performed poorly, but because I think they want to see Lizotte get that opportunity. And they're in an experimental phase as of right now. That's what we've seen from the Penguins. These competitions have carried over. It wasn't, hey, here's the opening night roster. Competitions are done. You guys are just going to stay in. That's what we saw last year. And that's why we suffered however many games of Jansen Harkins, despite the fact that he was struggling mightily. And a lot of people should have probably taken that roster spot. They kind of closed down the competitions. I think the depth and the talent in that depth is much higher this year. The opportunity for younger guys is going to be much better this year, because I think that's the direction the Penguins are trying to go. But that wraps up the questions for this episode of Tip of the Ice-Burgh Live. Shout out to everybody that is tuned in. Iconicare said, pronunciation is fine. Thanks for your thoughts. Appreciate you. Speaking of lives, and I got to get the dates right because I'm horrible when it comes to dates. We're going to have a watch-along week where we did it last week for the opening night of the season. 6-0 loss, but I still had a lot of fun live watching along to the Penguins opener with a lot of you guys. We're going to have a watch-along week, which I got to make sure I get the dates right, but I'll continue to push this and promote this. I believe it's going to be October 29th and Halloween, October 31st, excuse me. Penguins have games on that Tuesday and Thursday. We're going to go live during the entire game. We'll try to get guests for both of them, and we'll do what we do every Wednesday at 2 o'clock Eastern on Tip of the Ice-Burgh on YouTube. We'll answer all your questions. We'll open up some discussions, and we'll have some fun watching Penguins hockey. But that's going to do it for this episode of Tip of the Ice-Burgh Live. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this one. Remember, you can find us on YouTube at Tip of the Ice-Burgh. Make sure you like, make sure you subscribe, make sure you tell all of your friends, or you can find us anywhere you get your podcast from. We'll see you guys next time.